Welcome to G5 Classified, your one-stop shop for all things Group of 5 college football. Stepping up to the microphone are your hosts, Gabe Kuhn and Kyron Samuels. Now, let's talk some G5 football.
Joining us now for the G5 Classified podcast is Conference USA Associate Commissioner Tre Stallings. He's an offensive lineman. We have an offensive lineman party today. Trey, how's it going, man?
Good to talk to you. Going good. Glad to be joining you guys today.
Sir, yeah, it's a wild time right now too in college football. I got to say that right now. What do you? Let me just ask you this straight up, and we'll get into all the particulars of how you ended up in the position you're in now. But what do you think about where we're at, man? It was a different time. Even I played 14 to 17. Kai was a little before me. You were back in the early days of the 2000s. You got done in 2006 at Ole Miss. What do you think about where we're at as a college football society?
Man, it's scary, to be quite honest with you, because there's so many unknowns, so many things to really work through, obviously, at this stage. But I'll say this, though. I'll say this. Looking at the games, obviously, throughout the week and obviously on Saturdays, it feels like there's much more parity amongst college football than there's ever been. Like you saying, again, Vanderbilt, again, beating Alabama this past weekend, again, is a testament to how we're seeing the transfer portal maybe play an impact on, just the game itself. And then again, you see NIUs of the world upsetting Notre Dame. I think there is an opportunity for us to have a really exciting football season. But again, that's the stuff on the field. The stuff off the field is what's giving everyone a headache and really giving everyone a lot of pause for what the future will look like. So hopefully, again, with the preliminary approval of the House settlement, we can kind of get some footing for where we want to be moving forward. And man, hopefully we can get everybody moving in the same direction. I think that's the biggest thing is how can we get, again, 134 FBS schools moving in the same direction? And, is it 134 moving in the same direction? Right. I think those are some bigger questions.
100%, man. You've been working with Conference USA since 2020. In that time, you guys have added some teams, you've lost some teams. What kind of went into the process for adding teams? Because, my alma mater, Jacksonville State, is one of the schools that was recently added. When you were looking to add new teams, what was the process, and how did you land on a school like Jacksonville State that had a ton of success at the FCS level?
I'll tell you, we had a lot of phone calls, right? There was a lot of interest in joining Conference USA. And I would tell you, there was a huge vetting process. I think you have to look at the overall scope of, what the school is actually bringing to the table. I think that's number one. And when I say scope, you really have to look at what's their overall budget. I think that is a huge part of the conversation. Obviously, as you moving from FCS to FBS. And then again, what has their success been like? And obviously a large part of that conversation is what has their success been like in football, right? We really want to dive into that because we realize what football means to, again, just the NCAA entity itself. And so I think, we had to be very thorough. We had to look at, what the landscape was doing at that current moment, as well as what will look like in the near future. And we wanted to bring in people who had the success on the field, that had the success in other sports, and were really looking to invest, not just, for now coming into FBS or even being in FBS, but hey, how can you invest in what we want to do as a conference moving forward?
Yeah. Now, what do you think about like the geographic lines and everything just being just cut down? I mean, I'm a University of Memphis alum, and there was some discussion about them going to the Pac-12. There still is kind of some discussion about them going to the Pac-12. It just feels like we're in this day and age where obviously people are chasing money. I completely understand that. It makes a whole lot of sense, but it has done some, nasty things to, geographic rivalries and things like that. Like where do you stand on that?
You can't really ever fault an institution for taking advantage of an opportunity that they're given, right? Particularly when it benefits not only the university itself, but it can benefit the student athlete. So I never want to paint the picture where you said, hey, you should just stay just because. I think we need to realize what it actually does to the sport, though. Because what I believe is even as you have conferences, right, you still want to be able to maintain the rivalries and the relationships that you had with previous schools, because they impact the game itself. And so I look at, again, what FIU and what FAU was able to do with, again, two neighboring schools they used to be in Conference USA, that they kept that game on tap. I think we should see that through, across the board, not just at our level, but at the P4 level as well. Because again, we want to have those rivalries, right? I think about the Utah and the Utah States of the world, the BYU and the Utahs. Those things, again, while both schools were in the same conference, you hope to see matchups stay in place, and you hope people don't become, for lack of a better words, petty, based on one school moving to a different conference.
Right now at Conference USA, this is a real question that I don't think a lot of people see like a peek behind the curtain on. When you're deciding, I know you already talked about the schools you've added since you've been there. We understand that, but how do you decide when you're open for business, when you're not open for business in regards to going and adding schools? Or is it just consistently like you're in that mode? If there's a good opportunity, you take it.
I think in this day and age, you have to always be ready to do something, because you never know when something is going to happen. Like I look at, again, our circumstance with us, obviously losing UTEP within the past couple of weeks. So I think you always have to be prepared. That's where our presidents and our commissioner have always kind of laid their path down, and said that, hey, we just need to always have a conversation and always be prepared whenever things like this actually happen. So for us right now, I would say that we're never putting the evaluation piece down. We're always looking to look to see what's best for Conference USA.
Yeah, Maction is one of the things that captivates the country come November. How important was it for Conference USA to kind of take over the month of October and get those national spotlight games? Like, last night we had, the FIU game and Liberty playing on CBS, and then tonight you got Jack State playing on ESPN.
Game, by the way, gotta say,
yeah,
that was a fun one.
Then you got Jack State playing tonight on ESPN2. How important was it for Conference USA to get those national spotlight games?
Hey, I will tell you, it was extremely important, because the one thing we heard from our fans, and obviously even from people on campus, was, hey man, I have a hard time finding Conference USA games.
Right.
Like, it's not easy to just go and find a game, and so that was part of the conversation. And I'll tell you, when we first had this, when we had the initial conversation with our coaches, with our ADs, they were 100% on board with, again, creating more opportunities for us from a national branding standpoint, right? Because we just didn't have the windows. We didn't have the linear windows where people were able to turn on the television and watch Conference USA football. We were mostly playing on Saturdays, really being, in my opinion, lost in the shuffle with all of the other action that's going on. And so we really had a unique opportunity to take advantage of a situation where there was literally almost nothing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in the month of October. And so, again, working with our media partners, obviously working with our media rights negotiator, we're able to really strike a deal that made sense on both sides, in my opinion.
All right, now this position you hold right now, Conference USA Associate Commissioner, but when you got done at Ole Miss, got done with the NFL, did you ever think you'd be in the position you're in now? Because, I mean, I look at your work. You were in the NFL as director of player engagement. Then you were you spent a couple of years at Illinois in player development. Then you were in the NCAA office for a while, and then you finally end up in Conference USA. Was this always the career path that you were going to be on post-football play?
I'll tell you no. No, absolutely not. And I think it's more so of just opportunities being presented to you, right? And I think when I got out of football in 2010, I called a buddy of mine, Woody Dixon. And Woody Dixon at the time, he was really the executive associate commissioner for the Pac-12, really doing the exact same job that I'm doing today, right? And I found that funny now just thinking about it. And Woody really provided me with an opportunity post NFL career. And I will tell you, never in 1,000 years that I would imagine of myself being in this position now. Again, being able to touch the game of football, being around it, being infused in it, and then having the opportunity to help others make decisions that can impact the game, not just now, but for decades later. And so as we look at, again, the scope of football, where it's at now, the landscape we're in now, how can I put it on me now, how can I help our ADs, our presidents make decisions that would, again, benefit not just us today, but in future years as well.
And how important do you think, because you're one of these guys, to have former players, former coaches that played college football? How important do you think it is to have those guys in positions of power to be able to make changes?
Man, I think it's vital, right? We really need experts in the room when making decisions in situations like this. And again, not to take away from anyone that's making decisions now, but I just think it's different. I think it's different when you've played the game, you've been around the game, you've seen it from all different sorts of angles. It's just important that, again, your voice is heard and you're able to, again, speak to things that others may not be able to speak to. I think those are the things that are important. And one thing I may add, I think we have to find a way to strengthen the student athlete's voice as well. I think
Right.
in a world where so many high level decisions are being made, the student athlete's voice, while heard, is it strong enough to really voice their concerns that they really have? And I think those are some things that we as an entity needs to move forward in, and establish some parameters that can really help elevate them and put them in the spotlight more. Because I think they needed to have some responsibility in this. And again, how much responsibility do they have right now? I'm not sure what that is. I just think we need to magnify that a little bit more, in my opinion.
That flows perfectly into my next question, which was, you have that playing experience, right? You have experience being in a somewhat of a front office in a college program. How has that experience playing and going through that process and having to go to the meetings and deal with every type of people from different walks of life and have to get up for the deadlines and do all that stuff before you ever went to the professional world, quote unquote? How does that experience help you now that you are on this side?
It helps tremendously, right? Because, so again, we've all played offensive line. I feel like our demeanor, our whole aura, shall we say, is so much different than every other position on the field,
Right.
right? And I think a lot of times, particularly when things get hard, people have a tendency of for lack of a better word, just trying to brush it aside and not really deal with the issues itself.
Right.
And I would say for me, from my experience, because I'm so level headed, because I don't get too high, don't get too low, it's just a natural reaction for me to be poised in the midst of just chaos, and also be able to make decisions that are sound based on experience alone. And what I would say is, for me, I've really been able to not only just lean on my own experiences, but other experience, all the people that's, obviously been in my position as well. Like I think about, good friends like a Ray Former, Jamil Northcutts of the world, David Cutcliffes of the world, people who have really had a tremendous impact on my life. Again, you look at them and you lean on them for expert advice as well.
Yep. Now let's go back to the Ole Miss days. You played with, let's see, you played with Eli Manning for a little bit, I'd imagine. You played with Dexter McCluster would have been there, Patrick Willis, a lot of good talent. You went through two different coaches, David Cutcliffe and Ed O. I want to talk about that first. I know that the Ed O days were a little bit leaner, but at the same time, can you sort of compare and contrast those two coaches and what that was like? I have to imagine it was a complete 180 shift immediately.
Complete 180, right? I mean, I think, when you think about Coach Cutcliffe, again, great man, great leader, that was more old school in his approach, right? In terms of, again, how practice went. We practiced extremely hard. Again, he was a very giving man and a very caring man. And then again, you bring in Coach Orgeron, and he was a ball of lightning, I will tell you. And at that point, back in 2005, right, when he first came on the scene at Ole Miss, I had no idea what a Red Bull was. But to see this man drink at least 5 or 6 Red Bulls a day, and again, he was just full of energy. But
Right.
it was, both were good. I will say that both were good. I don't want to paint Coach Orgeron in a negative light at all. Again, it was just different people. a different way of doing things. I will tell you this. If Coach Orgeron recruited me out of high school from a small town in Mississippi, I probably would have went to Ole Miss as well, because to see that man in action as a recruiter, it was a sight to be seen. He was phenomenal, again, in selling selling his vision to not only the student athletes, but also to families, and really driving it home.
Yeah, and I really look back at him, and I think Kyron's probably in the same boat as me with this as well. Like when we talk about like true recruiters, he's probably number one, certainly top three, I think, in the history of college football.
Yes, no doubt,
Yeah.
man. And again, think about the people you just named. Okay, again, aside from Eli Manning, all those other dudes really came under Ed Orgeron, were developed under Ed Orgeron, and the list goes on and on and on to again 2 first-round draft picks when Michael Orr got drafted, and then Parade Jerry got drafted.
Yeah.
Both recruits by Ed Orgeron. So again, I mean, I think about, the Greg Hardys of the world, like all those different people, again, who came into the Ole Miss program, really helped shape, in my opinion, how Ole Miss is able to be successful as they are even right now. Just because, again, you've seen high-profile players being recruited there, and obviously having really good success there as well.
I got to ask you this because, with the new influx of the general manager in college football, it's different than coaching, right? I'm being a former player, playing some professional ball for a while. I thought I would never want to be in the front office or a coaching office because the recruiting grind, the on the field grind, all the extracurriculars. But it's kind of enticing at the thought of just managing the team, building the roster, doing that stuff. Could you ever see yourself being swayed back? Because I find myself thinking, like, if I ever would go back in that realm, that would be the way that I would go. Can you ever see yourself going back to a front office as a GM?
Hey, are you inside my thoughts? Because it is exactly because, again, it's so different now. Right. I think, this is my opinion. So I really want to make sure I say this is my opinion. I think the day of head coaches being the czar are completely over. I think you have to be able to have a general manager in place to manage the other sides of football. And I think we need to, as a collegiate entity, we need to make sure that we're allowing our coaches to coach and not be so concerned about recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where I've talked to a lot of coaches over the last 3 years, where they are just exhausted from recruiting so much. So you wonder, is the transfer portal as big as it is mainly because coaches just want to go out and find a guy that they know can at least function, or would they rather develop a kid coming out of high school or coming out of JUCO, whatever the case may be? I think we need to find a way to create that environment where you don't have, again, 10 assistant coaches going out trying to also recruit and also coach and also build relationships with their players. There has to be a balance, and we have to find a model that works for all of us. But
I'll tell you,
Kyle, to your point, general manager, absolutely.
Yeah, but there is a point though. These head coaches don't get any time off. They're recruiting the roster they have. They're recruiting the roster they don't have. They have to do everything. And then I feel like you've seen a lot of guys. Was Jeff Hafley at Boston College step back to go to the NFL and be a defensive coordinator? You had Chip Kelly, who had a decent job there at UCLA, ended up leaving to be an OC at Ohio State. You see some of these guys that have been coaching for a while, they're like, it's not worth it to be a head coach unless you're at those top few jobs in the country.
Yes, I'll tell you, I had an offensive line coach he's an assistant offensive line coach with the Arizona Cardinals. He was an O-line coach at Akron for about 3 years, okay? I saw him in February at the Combine, and he told me, he said, Trey, he said, what's amazing to me is the amount of time that I actually have off in order to spend with my own kids. He said, when I was at the University of Akron, I was on 24/7, almost 365 days a year. He said, because I had to not only recruit my current kids and build relationships with them, and he said that was critical for me. That was critical for me to know my players and get to build them as men. But I also had to go out and recruit. And then not only did I have to recruit, I also had to find a way to, build my own platform and see how I can excel in my own craft, right? How can I become a better offensive line coach? And he was like, just the professional development alone is kind of wiped away because you're so bogged down with everything else that's going on in college athletics.
All right. Before we get you out of here, I had to ask you this because, I was reading up on you, doing a little bit of research like we always do before we have a guest, and it says that you majored in mathematics. You almost never see that from a football player, from anybody. I mean, let's just be honest. There's not a ton of people majoring in mathematics. How did you land on that? And just talk about how grueling that was. I mean, you went to, people don't know, Ole Miss is a very respected school. It's a good school. How did you go through that grind, man, dealing with being a mathematics major and playing football?
But I'll tell you, it was a grind. What happened for me was I really thought I wanted to go into education, right? And so I started out on this path where I was in a bunch of education courses and while also taking all the maths, right? Because I figured, hey, I'm really good at math. I was good at it in high school. Let me just go down this path and see what it looks like. Well, I spent about 6 months in those education classes, and I was like, this not for me. And so really it was just an easier way for me to hurry up and get my degree. And what I would say was, man, I spent so many hours in the study hall, so many hours with professors. That I'll never forget. The most interesting question that I got in the class was, how do we basically prove the value of zero? And it was the most bizarre thing that I had ever even imagined or even thought of, again, for math.
Right.
But again, we went through the process, figured out basically, and it was at that point, I mean, it wasn't any, mathematical equations or anything like that. You were basically, proving theories at that point.
Yeah. Now, final thing, for your former teammate Eli Manning is eligible for the Hall of Fame. Is it no doubt first ballot? Get him in there.
It would be a shame. It would be a shame. I think he is. I think, again, he's the best quarterback I've ever played with. Kudos for him for really being a good friend, a good teammate, and an awesome leader. Again, me and Eli still talk back and forth. Still trying to get Eli to come be the what do we call it? The spokesperson for USA Media Day. So Eli, you ever see this? I need you in July, man. I need you to come do that for us. But I think he should, man. He's an impeccable player. Obviously, 2 Super Bowls speaks for itself.
Yep, for sure. Well, he is Conference USA Associate Commissioner Tre Stallings. This was an awesome conversation. I want to do it again down the road if you're willing. This was great.
I'm always available, man. Hey, and the fact that you guys play O-line, hey, that just makes it that much better.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate it. We'll do this again soon.
All right now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of G5 Classified. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a rating and a review wherever you download your podcasts. To watch this episode, head over to the Bluff City Media YouTube channel. We'll see you back here next week.